Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for joining me today. My name's Pamela Orr, and I'm Head of Training and Wellbeing at Validium as part of HealthHero. I'm here today to talk to you in relation to employee wellbeing. I also want to introduce the concept of peer support across organisations. And part of my agenda today is to look at the current challenges within employee wellbeing across organisations, to introduce you to peer support, to introduce you to how peer support could help organisations in terms of their health and wellbeing, diversity and inclusion strategies, to give some understanding of holistically how peer support could help across organisations, and to look at some stories, anecdotal evidence in relation to peer support. And I want to finish up with giving you an understanding of where peer support would fit within an organisation. Before I do that, I'll give you a brief understanding in terms of what qualifies me to talk about employee wellbeing and peer support. If you're part of the REBA Congress, you will receive my bio anyway. So I've worked in university organisations for the past 20 years as an educator, a university lecturer, as an examiner. I've supported thousands of students across their university experience. I've worked within universities in delivering materials in terms of counselling, mental health and psychology. I'm a qualified counsellor and psychotherapist, and I'm a registered supervisor where I support students who are training to be counsellors. And I also am passionate about wellbeing. Just before I joined HealthHero in September 2020, I worked in the University of Glasgow, and I led a service that supported students' wellbeing and mental health on campus and also in student accommodation. And part of that service was leading a programme called peer support. So I want to give you an understanding of what peer support is. But before we do that, the challenges that organisations have in terms of employee wellbeing are complex and are vast, and there is no one simple solution to those. We know from the Office of National Statistics that anxiety, stress and depression were the cause of 55% of work-related absenteeism and days off in 2020. So it is no wonder the research that came out of REBA's 2021 report suggested that employee wellbeing has been escalated to a business risk. So there's multiple challenges that come along with employee wellbeing. Our wellbeing in itself is very complicated, and it includes our physical health, our mental health, our ability to connect to others, our socioeconomic status, our feelings of safety, our ability to volunteer, our hobbies, our how we connect with people, and the list goes on. In terms of organisational pressures and organisational challenges, organisations are challenged with looking at how to support the impact of COVID, so that be long COVID, seen and unseen impacts. The challenges include things like how to implement and have a real lasting wellbeing strategy that changes cultures across organisations, that encourages conversations in terms of quality, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, mental health and wellbeing. Challenges in terms of how to train managers and what areas to train managers and leaders so that they can support their teams across organisations. And the list goes on. There are multiple different challenges for organisations. One of the ways that organisations could look at supporting employees could be with the implementation of peer support across the organisation. So I want to give you an understanding of what is peer support. Peer support is where colleagues, where peers come together to support each other in a meaningful way, in a space that is safe and confidential. Peer support is where employees, colleagues are able to have a space where they're not judged and where they're signposted across different organisations or internal support throughout the organisation. The concept of peer support is not new. The concept of peer support has been around for many decades. Peer support was developed predominantly in the areas of addiction, for example, Alcoholics Anonymous. And peer support has been utilised in a university academic context for a number of years. Oxford University have supported their staff as peers and their students for the best part of 25 years. And my work across organisations and institutions has seen the increase of peer support services over the past 7 to 10 years across the United Kingdom and Europe. Peer support, in terms of the concept, is that peers support each other because they have a shared experience. And I want to spend a bit of time telling you, what does a peer support training programme look like, and who would actually attend a peer support service, and why is it beneficial? So to stay on this slide in terms of what is peer support, the training programme to become a peer supporter just very much depends on who's delivering the training. Ultimately, it's between 30 hours or 16 hours of training, so around between 16 and 30 hours. And that training has to include how to work in an ethical and safe way. So peer supporters across your organisation are volunteers. They volunteer to support their peers the same way as a mental health first aider volunteers to take part in that programme. And peer support can very much sit alongside mental health first aid or independently of mental health first aid. So peer supporters are volunteers across the organisation who are trained in a programme by qualified and registered counsellors, psychotherapists or psychologists to support their colleagues. So how do they support their colleagues? Because they're not qualified counsellors, and training ensures that they're able to support in a very ethical and boundaried way. So training encompasses understanding the role of what is a peer supporter, how you attend and listen to someone who comes into the service, whether that be virtually or whether that be face to face, and very much supporting those challenges around working within a hybrid working model. And most importantly, with peer support, how you develop skills to be able to attentively listen and be empathic to the person in front of you. We often think we're good listeners, but we're not actually listening. We're probably hearing and really wanting to jump in with a bit of advice. And that isn't hugely beneficial often to people. Usually, what people want is a space to be heard, and that's what peer support provides. So, the training programme is first and foremost. Who would attend peer support? Anyone across the organisation. It's up to the organisation how they run a peer support service, as long as individuals are trained properly to be able to do that. Anyone in the organisation, whilst a hierarchy in an organisation is important for understanding roles and responsibilities, a hierarchy is not important in terms of understanding how to listen to someone that presents with stressors. Life is a roller coaster. We all have periods of ups and downs. We all have periods where we coast along. But to have a service within an organisation that we can drop into and have a 30-minute conversation, whether that be face to face or virtually, to be listened to be able to get whatever the stressors are off our chest. So what types of issues commonly come into peer support? It could be anything that affects an individual's life: work-related stress, relationship issues, financial concerns, relationships in terms of work, addiction, someone who's feeling low or anxious, someone who's about to present or progress in their career and maybe wants to have a conversation around that because they're feeling particularly anxious at the time. Money worries, bereavement, the list goes on. Anything that affects an individual and affects their day-to-day working life, they can drop into the peer support service to have a conversation about that. So what are the holistic benefits to having a peer support service or programme across the organisation to be able to help tackle and support an organisation's health and wellbeing, equality, diversity and inclusion criteria and strategy? The organisation, first of all, benefits because they are saying to people across the organisation, we are providing a service where people will be trained to support you. We're acknowledging that work and life balance can be very difficult. People don't always want to talk to their managers. They don't always want to talk to occupational health if it's relevant and it's supported, that's fine, but it doesn't mean that we don't want to talk to a peer, someone that understands us as an individual. They don't necessarily have to have been through the particular experience. So organisations saying we are taking our health and wellbeing strategy seriously, and we're willing to invest to train colleagues across the organisation to provide that space for you to be listened to, whether you're working from home, working on site, or working as a bit of both. In terms of the staff, why would they go along to a peer support service? Well, staff get a space where they can be heard, where they don't feel judged, where they feel listened to by their peers, a space where they maybe feel there is no risk because it's confidential, so risk of any information being released, a space where they know people are trained, so they are secure and safe, and the individuals that are listening to them are working in an ethical way. In terms of volunteering to be a peer supporter, what are the benefits to that? Because there has to be some benefits. Volunteering, according to lots of different research, increases our levels of happiness, increases our self-esteem, boosts our confidence, but there is other benefits to peer support. So peer support is a skills-based programme. Whilst we're introducing to students or anyone who wants to train as a peer supporter, the concepts around what are common mental health issues and how to work with risk and suicide, and they are working within the confines of being able to listen and signpost. And that's a skills-based programme. So like I said, we think we're good listeners, but do we know how to actively listen? Do we understand the difference between empathy and sympathy? Do we know the use of questions and how questions can allow someone to really open up and engage in a conversation? But questions can also encourage someone to shut down. Do we understand what verbal and non-verbal behaviours are, and how to display those and pick those up appropriately? So these are basic counselling skills. Peer supporters are not counsellors, but they're there to listen attentively, and they're there to signpost, so they can work with the organisation in terms of being able to signpost to what the organisation can do to support individuals internally and also externally. They're not a referral system, they are signposting. It's up to the individual if they choose to attend, whether that be an EAP appointment or whether that be looking at some self-help information. So in terms of peer support, I want to give you some anecdotal stories, and I'll run through these reasonably quickly, so the information's on the screen for you to be able to look at yourself. We have Rebecca, and Rebecca has joined an academic institution at a reasonably young age, an 18-year-old. She came from quite a chaotic background, and Rebecca has found integrating into the university with what she would class as normal people very challenging. There wasn't a peer support service in the institution, and Rebecca started self-harming within a few weeks of attending the institution and had a serious suicide attempt. Rebecca was working with a counsellor, but it was also acknowledged that peer support could have supported Rebecca through this situation. Peer supporters could have gave Rebecca space to be listened to be heard, for experiences to be normalised, and signposted to services across the organisation that could have supported Rebecca. And then we've got Josh. So Josh works in a hospital as a senior care assistant, and over the past 18 months, the pressure has really been immense for Josh. Pressure to work overtime, pressure with increased regulations, and the pressure that's coming from home as a result of working overtime. There is a peer support service in Josh's organisation, and he went along to a drop-in appointment in the evening, spoke for 40 minutes to a trained peer, was able to offload in terms of what he was experiencing, got a bit of information about some support within the organisation, and left feeling as if he had a weight lifted off his chest. He was listened to, he wasn't judged, and that space was for him alone where no one was trying to give advice. And then we have Raquel. So Raquel's entered the United Kingdom on a one-year teaching programme, hoping to secure employment. She's seen a poster advertising peer support training in her institution, and she decided to go along to train to become a peer supporter. As a result of the skills that Raquel learned in the peer support programme and being a peer supporter, She was more empathic. She built her emotional intelligence. She understood how to be more resilient herself. She understood her own mental health. She was able to communicate better. She was able to understand how to work with individuals and use of silences, which is extremely important. Silences are important often in communication. And as a result of that, Raquel was able to secure a role in the United Kingdom as a tutor. And as far as she was concerned, those skills were one of the leading contributors to her securing the role. So peer support has multiple success stories like this. What is the importance then of peer support in terms of making sure that your supporters and organisations are supported themselves? Within Validium, our training programme is called Wellbeing Supporters. So you see in the next slide, the term Wellbeing Supporter means the same as peer supporter. It's very important. Peer supporters are trained by counsellors, psychologists, or psychotherapists in an ethical and safe way, and that guarantees that. It's very important that they're supported within the organisation, so monthly meetings with other wellbeing supporters and perhaps with HR to support them. And it's also important that wellbeing supporters are given individual one-to-one supervision, whether that be regular, whether that be monthly or fortnightly or quarterly by the organisation, to ensure that they are supported in the role. We can't leave people supporting others and not support them ourselves. So just to finish off my presentation, you've had a bit of a whistle-stop tour of peer support, and I want to now hopefully get an understanding of what peer support is. Where would it fit within an organisation? So very often organisations will have lots of articles and lots of posters and information and activities that people can boost their own resilience, support their own mental health, which is very important to be able to understand how to be resilient, support ourselves, and we would call that self-help. Organisations also have access to managers for support, occupational health and HR, and more specialist support through EAP. So peer support would sit in the middle of that. The whole premise of peer support is early intervention. If you can talk to a trained colleague, then perhaps September's issue or stressor doesn't become December's crisis. So I want to thank you very much for listening to me today. I have put some journal articles that you may be interested in reading in relation to peer support at the end of the presentation. And I hope that my passion around peer support, supporting organisations and being able to actively change that culture of connection across organisations has really came across today. So thanks very much.